Chapter 1. The Dark.
Taylor heard rasping breaths being taken in. Scott is breathing, he thought, relieved. However, a new wave of panic hit him as soon as he realized that the breathing was not Scott's, but his own. "Scott!" Taylor croaked out in the dark. No answer came. Taylor was still wet from the ride through the waterfall. "Scott!" He said again, this time a little louder. The dark was all-encompassing. Taylor had no idea where he was. He did know he wasn't dead, because he could feel every ache and pain in his body. He felt disoriented and confused. He was having all sorts of thoughts, but the thing he wanted most to hear right now was Scott. "Tay?" The question echoed. "Scott, are you okay?" Taylor asked as he stumbled over to where he had heard Scott. "No, okay is not the word I would use to describe how I feel," Scott replied. "You know what I mean." Taylor smiled, knowing that Scott would only reply that way if he was generally all right. "Yeah, nothing is broken as far as I can tell," Scott grumbled, and a small flame licked into the air. Scott had found his lighter. Taylor was about 10 feet away and crawled over to him. The light showed they were in a small cavern. "Where the fuck are we, Taylor?" Scott asked, the nerves very apparent in his voice. "I'm not sure, but..." Taylor trailed off and looked around. "But," Scott prompted, "I think that instead of being washed into the river, we got washed in an eddy," Taylor said. "This must be a cavern formed by some kind of underground stream." "Well, so the next question is, how the hell do we get out of here?" Scott asked. "I'm not sure yet. Save the butane in your lighter." And with that, the flame went out. "Well, can we swim out?" Scott asked. "Honestly, I don't think so. The current that washed us in here, if it's strong enough to do that, I really doubt that we'd be able to swim out against it," Taylor replied. "Well, encouragement is obviously not your best asset," Scott replied, trying to make light, but the nervousness was back and even stronger in his voice. "I didn't say there was no way out. If this chamber was formed by an underground river, there must be some kind of tunnel it came through," Taylor said. "How do you know a river formed this?" "Well, the eddy could do the pool, but I doubt it could form a chamber like this high. I may be wrong. Cave formation was never high on my list," Taylor replied uncertainly. "Then how do we know there's still not a river running through it?" Scott asked. "I think we'd hear the water running," Taylor replied, trying to sound more confident than he was. "Well, let's find this tunnel and get the hell out of here," Scott replied. To say he was scared would be a horrible understatement, but if Taylor was still optimistic, then Scott could at least hold on to hope for a while. The darkness set in again, no light from any direction. Scott lit the lighter again, and they worked quickly to find the mouth of the tunnel. Taylor had not been wrong. They found a small opening in the back of the cavern. It was tight, but they would be able to squeeze in. "I hope that opens up a little bit more when we get in there," Scott observed. "Me too," Taylor replied. "Let's get some rest and head in." They let the lighter go out and sat in the darkness. They did not speak. They only sat with their own thoughts for a little over an hour. Neither of them wanted to make a move to the entrance of the tunnel. The dark had taken over, and the sounds of their breathing was all that was to be heard. Scott tried to calm himself. He did not know how long they'd be in that tunnel, but he did know that once they committed to going through it, they would have to continue until they emerged from the other side, or were blocked and would have to turn back. He tried to force the latter from his mind. If they were forced to turn back, their fate was sealed. They would die in the dark and most likely never be found. Scott tried desperately to force that idea out of his head. Taylor sat trying to breathe deeply and force his own fear away. The best he accomplished was to push it aside. After their long silence, Scott was the first to break it. "Well, I guess we need to go." "Yeah, you're right," Taylor said. "Before we go, I need to ask you something." We both know that this may not be the way out of here. But until we are proven wrong, let's try not to think or talk about it. It's going to be hard enough without that, Scott said.
Taylor smiled in the dark. Why? Are you afraid of the dark? Taylor asked, understanding that the last statement was the last time that they would talk about that possibility unless they had to. The dark? No, the idea of squeezing into a tunnel in pitch black and crawling who knows how long until we find the other end? Yeah, a little, Scott shot back. Always knew you were a little yellow, Taylor shot back. And they crawled into the tunnel. Dick, Scott replied as he crawled in after him. They did not use the lighter, they just crawled into the darkness. They talked as they crawled on their hands and knees for over an hour, and the passage did not get bigger. Although both Taylor and Scott were discouraged by this, they did not speak their doubt. Tiffany's gonna be fucking pissed at you, dude, Taylor said, chuckling to himself. Well, yeah, probably. But I do have a pretty good excuse, Scott replied. What? I fell off a waterfall and had to crawl through a pitch-black tunnel to get out? Shit, man, I don't even believe that, Taylor replied. Yeah, I guess you're right. Give me the lighter, Taylor said, a new fear in his voice. What's wrong? Scott asked as he passed the lighter up. It gets tighter up here, Taylor replied. He knew this would make his friend scared, but there was no other way to say it. He sparked the lighter. The light hurt both of their eyes. Taylor stared as hard as he could into the deep beyond him. The tunnel definitely got smaller. They would no longer be able to go on their hands and knees. It was just large enough to let them low crawl and continue. Taylor let the flame go out and put the lighter in his pocket. He dropped to his belly without a word and started to low crawl. Scott followed suit behind him. They inched up for another 2 hours, but only made half the progress they had made in the first hour. Both were beginning to feel the weight of fear collapse in on them. Man, it's fucking dark, Scott observed. Master of the obvious. You take that whole time to figure that out? Taylor said and laughed. Sorry, man, but I've never been around this kind of dark. I mean, I keep looking all around for some point of light, for reference, Scott tried to explain. No, I get you. It's darker than anything I've ever seen. Or not seen, as the case may be, Taylor replied. They continued, and in the middle of their third hour, Taylor let out a small cry of happiness. What? Scott asked, fearing the worst. I'm not sure, but I think I see a light, Taylor replied. Well, move faster, slow ass. There's only one way to find out, Scott said, and within 15 minutes the tunnel expanded and allowed them to crawl. Both of them were feeling stronger already. Well, if you're seeing things, I'm seeing them too, 'cause that looks like a light to me, Scott said, the fear now out of his voice. They moved faster, and again the tunnel grew larger. They were able to stand up and walk. They stretched their aching bodies, and now it could not be denied, light was starting to show the way. They walked briskly, smiles plastered on both of their faces. They thought that this horrible adventure was soon to be over, but they were very wrong. The adventure had just begun. The first clue was that the light did not appear to be sunlight. Soon they found out why. They finally emerged from the tunnel, not into daylight as they had hoped. Taylor and Scott looked at each other in confusion. Neither face offered an explanation or even an idea of what they had walked into. They found themselves in a giant rock chamber. The top was close to 30 feet high, with a small waterfall that fell from the ceiling into a hole in the floor at the back. The light had come from thousands of candles all over the chamber. It almost had the feel of a cathedral or other place of worship. The walls were carved out to be smooth. Designs throughout were etched and carved into the walls, which arced into the ceiling. What the fuck? Scott asked. And as he did, they both noticed a door on the right began to creak open. A tall man in his late 20s or early 30s emerged. That must have been quite a tiring endeavor to crawl through that way, the man stated. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock, Scott said, fear and confusion mixing into his words. If you are here to attempt to assassinate me, I suggest you get on with it, he said. His rich voice boomed in the chamber. You think we're here to kill you? Taylor asked. He answered the question himself. We are just trying to get out of the inside of a mountain alive. I assure you, we fell down a waterfall and it washed us into a cavern. Then we crawled through this tunnel and got here. We just want to get home, Taylor tried to explain. Do not be afraid. You'll have nothing to fear any longer, the man said. His voice was smooth and calm. What is this place? Taylor asked. This is my home, or more correctly, a small part of it, the man replied. My name is Thraint, and you are welcome here. Wherever the hell here is, Scott added, looking very suspiciously at Thraint. My word, you two must be scared out of your minds, and I am sure that my humble home was not what you expected to find. I give my word that you have nothing to fear from me. Are you hurt at all? Thraint inquired. Nothing that a shower, food, and some answers won't cure, Taylor replied. Even though he felt very uneasy for some reason, he wanted to trust Thraint. Well, let us first cure the shower and food, and the answers will come, I assure you. Please, follow me. Taylor and Scott were too tired and confused to refuse, and followed him through the door. After they had all passed through, Thraint started to close the door behind them. Taylor was looking back, and he could have sworn as the door slung shut, every candle in that room went out. My eyes were in the dark too long, he thought to himself. Thraint then retook the lead, and led them through the place he called his home. He took them each to a shower, and they got in and washed the muck away. Taylor felt guilty at how long he stood in the shower, but it felt so good he could not tear himself away. As he dried off, he found some sweats on the bed in his eyes. He dressed and went into the hall. Scott walked out, in sweats as well. Confused would be a good word, Scott said. No shit, Taylor replied.